Picture this: a bitter February morning, 1869. The sky hangs low like a mourning shroud. Inside the silent heart of Westminster Abbey, time seems to hesitate, holding its breath as Dean Arthur Stanley steps into the cold stone corridor, flanked by torchbearers and trembling silence. The marble floor beneath him bears the footprints of kings, but he walks toward something even more ancient than memory. The tomb no one dares to name out loud. The workmen dig, the pickaxes scream against stone, and then a crack. A hollow breath escapes from below. Not air, a smell. It rolls out like fog, thick and oily, a cloying stench of rot, of sweetened death, of a queen long dead but not forgotten. It clings to their clothes. It sinks into their lungs. The men freeze. One crosses himself. Another vomits in the shadows. But Dean Stanley steps closer, clutching his notes, his maps, and his pride. He has come searching for the lost tomb of King James III, but what he finds is something far older, far darker. He finds a story that no monument dares to speak of. He finds a coffin, heavy, misshapen, groaning under centuries of silence. He finds a second coffin, crushed beneath it. He finds Elizabeth and Mary, stacked like meat in a butcher's vault. Above ground, they are legends. Below, they are just flesh, slowly decaying in royal lead-lined coffins that no longer seal the truth. The truth is this: there is no dignity in power once the breath has left the lungs. This is not a story about a queen. This is a story about what we do to the dead once we no longer fear them, about how even the virgin queen can be defiled, not by enemies in life, but by curiosity, pride, and the cold politics of burial. If you think marble monuments speak of peace, if you think royal blood is immune to rot, if you think time forgets, let me show you what still festers beneath the abbey. Let me show you what it smells like when a crown decays. Part 1. The slow death of a queen. She would not lie down. For 4 days and 4 nights, Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England and Ireland, the last of the House of Tudor, stood upright in her chamber, stiff as iron, silent as stone, her body refusing what her mind already knew. That rest would mean surrender, and surrender meant death. She was 70 years old, but what does age mean to a woman who ruled time itself? This was the queen who had stared down the Spanish Armada, who had danced until dawn at Whitehall, her laughter echoing like a bell of triumph across Europe, who had once looked a bishop in the eye and told him she would marry no man, for she was already wedded to her people. And now she stood, motionless, wordless, terrified. Her ladies in waiting, pale and sleepless, circled her like silent moons. They padded the cold floor with cushions. They begged her to lie down. They wept in corners. But she would not, could not. She was haunted, they said, by ghosts, by visions, by the smell of her own end. One servant found a playing card on her throne, a face card nailed through the skull, dripping with meaning. Another swore they heard her muttering prayers to no god they recognized. Even her most loyal courtiers had begun to speak in whispers of signs, of omens, of the soul of England unraveling. Inside her mouth, her teeth had rotted away. On her scalp, tufts of golden hair once kissed by kings had fallen in clumps. She no longer allowed anyone to bathe her, to dress her, to see her without her painted mask of power. But now the paint had cracked, and beneath it the woman trembled. A queen, they called her, glorious, eternal. But on that cold March morning in 1603, Elizabeth was not a queen. She was a woman who had outlived her time, clinging to the edge of consciousness, knowing that once she fell, she would never rise again. And when she finally collapsed, crumpling like parchment onto the soft nest of cushions her servants had prepared in dread, they all knew, the Virgin Queen was dying, not in glory, not in battle, not beneath stained glass or in the arms of a lover. She died in silence, surrounded by the scent of unwashed flesh, cracked powder, and rose oil gone sour. She died as all mortals do, alone, inside a body she could no longer command. They tried to keep the illusion intact, the curtains drawn, the court stilled, the physicians sworn to secrecy. But the truth slipped through the walls like damp. England's golden icon, the flame-haired ruler who had once made kings kneel and popes tremble, had become a fragile shadow of herself. And as her breath grew thin, as her voice faded to nothing but memory, a darker question lingered in every heart in that chamber. When she goes, what will become of the mask she wore, and what horrors will they find once it's removed? Part 2. The Funeral and the Lie. The Queen was dead, but she was not allowed to rest. March the 24th, 1603. The Virgin Queen exhaled her last breath in the silence of Richmond Palace. And yet, as her body cooled, the myth of Elizabeth only burned brighter. They would not open her corpse. They would not allow a post-mortem. They said it was to preserve her dignity, to protect the legend. But in truth, no one wanted to know what secrets lay beneath her flesh. Was her body still pure, as propaganda had insisted for decades? Was the facade of virginity just that? A facade? Or was there something else? Something no courtier dared speak aloud. Whatever the truth, they locked it away in lead. A coffin was cast, thick, sealed, heavy as guilt. Inside, the Queen was enclosed like a secret, like a threat. No priest saw her bare. No surgeon touched her skin. She was wrapped in velvet and myth, a lie preserved in metal. And then the spectacle began. On April 28th, they paraded her corpse through London like a goddess on a throne of death. Her hearse was pulled by horses draped in black velvet. The coffin itself, covered in purple cloth, bore a full-sized effigy, a wooden replica of Elizabeth, lifelike and radiant, dressed in royal robes with a scepter in one hand and a crown in the other. People gasped, some screamed. For a moment, it felt as if she had risen, not died, as if death had no power over her, as if the Virgin Queen still reigned. Windows overflowed, streets choked with mourners, even rooftops buckled under the weight of those desperate to catch a glimpse of their sovereign one last time. But it wasn't her they saw. It was the lie they needed. And what a beautiful lie it was. The effigy's cheeks were rosy, the eyes glittered, the mouth curled in regal serenity. A dead woman never looked so alive. But beneath that cloth, beneath the oak and velvet and ritual, lay the rotting truth. A body decaying in silence, a coffin sealed too tight, trapping the gases of decomposition, turning her final resting place into a ticking bomb of flesh and fume. They buried her beneath Westminster Abbey, beside her grandfather, King Henry VIII, encased in lead, locked in darkness, out of sight, but not out of danger, because even in death, Elizabeth Tudor was not safe. Not from politics, not from curiosity, not from the living. And above her grave, the lie stood tall, marble, eternal, beautiful, a queen without blemish, a crown without rust, a story too precious to disturb. But truth rots, no matter how deep you bury it, and in time it would rise, like a smell through stone, like a whisper from the vault, like a corpse pressing against the lid. Part 3. The Stacked Tomb. 3 years later, England had a new king, James I, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, nephew to the woman who had once signed his mother's death warrant, and now the one who held Elizabeth's corpse in his hands. He could have left her alone. He could have sealed the tomb, preserved the illusion, let the virgin queen rest beneath her grandfather's feet. But kings are not poets. They are architects of legacy, and James had a message to send. Without ceremony, without public mourning, he moved her, had her dug up, had her dragged through silence and shadows, and placed, not beside her allies, but atop her enemy. Mary and Elizabeth, half-sisters, half-enemies, a Catholic and a Protestant. One burned heretics, the other executed queens. Two women who ruled with iron and fire, now stacked like artifacts in a museum of spite. Elizabeth's coffin, massive and grotesque in its royal dimensions, was laid on top of Mary's, not beside, not above, in a shrine, directly on top, like dominance pressed into lid. Above the vault, James commissioned a white marble tomb, grand, glittering, false. Elizabeth's statue alone adorned the top, her titles carved into stone with careful precision. Mary's name was an afterthought, a footnote in the grave she now physically supported. The inscription lied, "Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep." But Mary did not sleep. She endured. For more than 2 centuries, their tomb remained untouched. No one dared descend. No one wanted to know what happens when politics decays. But below the marble, the truth festered. Elizabeth's coffin began to sink. Under the weight of lead, under the weight of history, under the weight of vengeance disguised as honor. Imagine it. 2 queens, stacked, crushed, forgotten, one corpse resting, the other bearing it, a grotesque sculpture in the dark, sculpted not by hands but by rot and regret. And above them, tourists strolled across the abbey floor, marveling at monuments and stained glass, never knowing that just beneath their feet, a war between sisters still pressed on in silence. Part 4. The opening of the vault. 2.5 centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Crowns changed hands. But beneath Westminster Abbey, the tomb of the 2 queens remained untouched, sealed in silence, stewing in pressure and decay. Until 1869, Dean Arthur Stanley, an ecclesiastic with the soul of a historian and the ambition of a grave robber, received royal permission from Queen Victoria herself. His mission, to locate the lost tomb of King James I. But to find James, he would have to disturb the dead. And so, on a bitter February morning, the abbey became a dig site. Workmen chipped at the stone floor of Henry VII's chapel. Pickaxes screamed. Dust filled the lungs of the living. And then they breached the vault. The stone cracked open like an ancient scab, and from within came a wave of air so thick, so foul, it clung to skin like oil. Not just the smell of age, but of something wrong. Centuries of rot, trapped, fermented, desperate to escape. They held torches aloft. The flickering flames painted the scene in nightmare tones. 2 coffins stacked, one massive and bloated, the lid warped and bulging like the skin of a corpse too long submerged. That was Elizabeth. Beneath her, smaller, crushed under the weight, Mary. The lead had turned green with age, veins of corrosion twisting across its surface. The coffins looked more like sea monsters than royal remains. Not boxes, but relics of pressure and silence. And then Dean Stanley saw it, a name carved into the lead. John Weir, 1645. A scratch of history, a trespass. Who was John Weir? A soldier? A looter? He had opened the vault before, centuries earlier, in the middle of a civil war, and defiled the Queen's coffin with his name. If he could enter, what else had he done? What might he have taken? What had been lost? What had been touched? And why had no one stopped him? Stanley carefully documented every marking, the Tudor rose, the initials, the dates etched on Elizabeth's lid. But his pen trembled when describing what he saw. He wrote that the Queen's coffin was larger and more distinctly shaped in the form of the body, which meant one thing: the lead had conformed to her corpse. 2.5 centuries later, and her body still pressed through the metal, like a scream held back by skin. No autopsy had ever been performed. No one had seen her in death. And yet now, she was here, outlined in lead, preserved like a relic, grotesque in its intimacy. They did not open the coffin, not fully, not yet. But they didn't need to. The smell was enough, the pressure in the air, the silence that followed. Stanley would later publish his account. It was scholarly, respectful, proper. But between the lines, the horror bled through. He had gone looking for a king. Instead, he found a queen, still fighting for space in death, still crushing her sister beneath her, still trapped inside a coffin that no monument could sanctify. And he left it as he found it, a tomb of dominance, of silence, of shame. Part 5. The trade in royal flesh. The dead were supposed to rest, but in England, even royalty was not safe from the living, especially not their corpses. Once buried with ceremony and song, the bodies of kings and queens became something else over time: curiosities, specimens, commodities. Take poor Catherine of Valois, Queen of England, wife of Henry V. Her corpse, for centuries, was displayed in Westminster Abbey like a carnival attraction. Tourists paid Abbey staff to see her, to stare into the hollowed face of a once-crowned woman. They opened the lid, showed her to strangers, sold death like theater. And they weren't alone. In the Abbey Church of St. Albans, women came to the tomb of Duke Humphrey of Gloucester not to pray, but to steal his embalming fluid, convinced it could cure wrinkles. They bottled it, sold it, drank it. When the fluid ran out, they turned to his fingernails, his hair, his bones. They took him apart, piece by piece. Elsewhere, relics of royalty turned up in the most mundane places. In 1871, the tomb of King Richard II was opened during restoration. His skeleton was described as nearly perfect. But soon after, someone found a cigarette box tucked away in the basement of the National Portrait Gallery. Inside, fragments of wood from Richard's coffin, bits of embroidered fabric, a sliver of royal glove, all labeled, all cataloged. The box was dated, sealed, forgotten. What kind of country keeps royal remains in a cigarette box beneath a museum? A country that no longer reveres its dead, but collects them. In 1784, church wardens pried open the coffin of Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry V. Her hair, they said, was still of a beauteous golden color and 2 feet long. They didn't rebury it in reverence. They cut it, took it, showed it. The dead were no longer sacred. They were currency. And behind every theft, every display, every whispered tour in a cathedral's darkened corner, there was a lesson. Once the soul is gone, the body belongs to whoever gets there first. Even Queen Elizabeth's lead coffin wasn't safe. Graffiti, secret openings, the stench of gas pressing against the seal like a held breath. In some accounts, her corpse exploded from the pressure, a foul, wet rupture of decay and gas trapped too long. Victorian scientists debated whether to open her again. Some argued for science, others for history, but no one spoke for dignity. Not really. Because by then, the body was no longer a person. It was an opportunity. They spoke of embalming as preservation, of display as education. But it was all the same. A hunger to own the past, to hold power in your hands, even if it dripped with centuries of rot. And as you walk through those hallowed halls today, know that beneath your feet lie kings without skulls, queens without peace, and tombs emptied by curiosity, dressed in scholarly robes. What we did to their bodies says more about us than it ever did about them. Part 6. The beautiful lie versus the rotting truth above ground. She is divine. Elizabeth I, cast in marble and myth, reclines beneath the vaulted ceiling of Westminster Abbey, a queen forever young, forever glorious. Her stone likeness bears a crown, a scepter, a royal orb. Her face is calm, her posture perfect, her robes flow like frozen silk. She does not stink, she does not rot, she does not die. This is the lie, a monument carved for the living, a shrine built not for remembrance, but for illusion. Because beneath that flawless effigy, the truth lies sealed in darkness, a lead coffin, bulging, splitting, hissing. Elizabeth's body is still there, twisted, bloated, half dissolved inside a metal tomb that was never meant to last. The lead, soft and corruptible, has sagged into her shape. Her bones push against it like a hand against wet linen. Time has not been kind, nor has politics, nor has curiosity. Worse still, her coffin still presses down on Mary's. That grotesque architecture of domination has not changed. The Protestant queen still suffocates her Catholic sister, even in death. And Mary, the forgotten, still bears the weight in silent darkness, her coffin crumpled, her name absent from the marble above. Visitors pass overhead. They snap photos. They whisper about history. They marvel at the effigy, remark on the elegance, the serenity. But the real Elizabeth lies beneath, not serene, not preserved, not at peace. There are no stained glass angels in her tomb. Only gas, only pressure, only the slow alchemy of meat and metal. And if you could peel back the floor, pierce through the stone, open the vault, you would not find a queen. You would find a truth too human to be remembered. A corpse, not a crown. A woman, not a myth. Rot, not glory. And yet we choose the monument. We worship the image. We walk above her bones and call it reverence. But reverence would mean silence. Reverence would mean letting her rest. Instead, we build statues of lies and beneath them entomb the unbearable truth. The real Elizabeth is not in the marble. She's in the stench that once escaped that vault, in the graffiti carved into her lead lid, in the bloated outline of her final form. She is not smiling. She is sinking. And perhaps that's the most fitting end for a queen who refused to kneel in life, to lie forever beneath the lie, conquered at last by the one throne no monarch escapes: decay. The crown decays. She ruled an empire with words sharper than steel. She outlived kings, crushed rebellions, denied marriage, defied the Pope. She was the Virgin Queen, not by purity, but by power. And yet, in the end, Elizabeth Tudor was conquered, not by a foreign army, not by a traitor's blade, but by time, by biology, by the indifference of the grave. For more than 4 centuries, she has lain beneath Westminster Abbey, encased in lead, stacked above her sister like a verdict, the weight of her coffin pressing slowly, relentlessly into the one woman she never reconciled with. A posthumous act of political cruelty, cast in metal. Her effigy above, painted, robed, eternal, still dazzles. But it lies. The real Elizabeth is in the silence, in the compression of bone, in the chemical ballet of decomposition playing out behind royal seals. And every time a tourist walks above her, every time a historian dissects her life, every time a camera pans over her statue, we disturb her again. She is not resting in peace. She is on display. She is consumed, even in death. Because we cannot let go. We dress up corpses in mythology, call it reverence, and ignore the scent that still lingers, the moral stench of what we do to the powerful once they can no longer protest. We claim to honor her, but we did not protect her, not from the grave robbers, not from the scientists, not from our own curiosity. And so she remains, not buried, displayed, not forgotten, exploited. Elizabeth, the queen who never bowed to any man, now lies flat, horizontal, powerless, beneath the weight of legacy and the cold kiss of lead. And when all monuments crumble, when all myths fade, what will remain? Not the marble, not the titles, not the throne. Only this, a woman in a sealed box, sinking, pressing, rotting. The crown, too, decays.